Hello everyone and welcome to Talent500 YouTube channel. I am Saumya, a software engineer and an educator. Today in this detailed video, I will tell you the most important, the most significant and commonly asked interview questions for the role of mobile application developer. On the internet, we find the easy, quick ones, but today we will deep dive and discuss all the significant concepts. So let's get started. Interview questions for mobile app developers. Explain the Android activity lifecycle with example. This is the very important question when it's about Android interview. It doesn't matter if you are giving interview for mid-level, senior level or beginner level. Android app activity lifecycle is a very significant thing. As any simple thing, like if we talk about, let's say, a simple bottle is there, or human, if we talk about humans as well, everyone has a life cycle, right? The time when anything comes into existence till it is destroyed completely, the period between these two things, when the let's say human, bottle or any app activity, whatever that is, when that comes into existence till it's destroyed, the period between that, how it's created, started, what operations are getting performed, that's very significant, right? So let's quickly understand the activity life cycle of an application. I will give some examples as well to make things clear. The very first thing, this diagram is very significant when it's about Android app activity life cycle. So whenever you are using any application, let's say this is your application, right? So on the screen, whatever the user is seeing, the UI, UX, whatever that is, for user, that is the screen, right? That is the UI. For us developers, that is activity. Okay, that is activity. So the very first thing, activity is launched whenever you click on the app icon. The like it will open up, and whatever the page the developer has created, it will show up there, right? So the very first thing, activity is launched. As soon as the activity is launched, the very first method which is created is the on create method. If you see here in the Android Studio, so this is your Android Studio, right? And this is your main activity. As you can see, this is the first method, the on create method, which is called, right? So this is the most significant method. As soon as the activity is launched, the on create method is created. After that, once the on create method is called, once the activity is visible, is becoming visible to the user, on start method is getting called. And after that, on resume, there are two stories of on resume. So let's say you are using I will like give an example to make it clear how and when on resume is called. Okay, so let's say you are using the application and the screen is, the activity is completely visible to you, and maybe you are watching YouTube video and suddenly a WhatsApp message or text message pops up. You will immediately shift to other application, right? But at the same time, you will want that once you come back after replying to that message on YouTube, you want the same video at the same timestamp to be continued, right? So in that case, when you immediately switch from one application to another application, then on resume method is called. Because when you, let's say you were using the application, when you will go on other application, then on pause will be called, because for that particular moment you switch to another application, so that activity is paused. Okay, and when you will come back there, then on resume will be called. Okay, so this is the these are the methods that are called when you immediately switch from one application to other application. I hope this part is clear with the example. And let's say after that, when the activity is finished, or when you are done using the activity there, that's no longer visible to the user, that means it's stopped. It's maybe you have clicked back button, so other activity or main screen of the application will be there. Or maybe if there was only, let's say, one activity which you were using in the application and you clicked back buttons on stop, and then the application will be completely destroyed, right? So this is the most significant activity life cycle. And yes, I mean, if you look at this one, after on stop, let's say if you are restarting the activity, then on restart also comes into picture. And if in case, let's say, you switch to another application and the first application is still in the background, right? But when you are using another application and that needs the same resources as the first one, then in that case Android manager will kill the first application so that those resources can be allocated to high priority, like what if the other application needs it, right? So apps with high priority needs memory, then Android manager will itself kill that application. So on stop and app process will be killed, and everything will start again if you will go on the previous application. So this is how the Android app activity works. The most significant methods, let's quickly write them down so that you don't forget them. The very first one, on create. Okay, it is called when the activity is first created, when the activity is first created. And after that there is on start method. Okay, on start method is called when the activity is becoming visible to the user, becoming visible to the user. And then there is on resume method, on resume. So it is called when the activity will start interacting with the user. I have already explained with example when on resume will be called, right? And in the same way, on pause, it is called when the activity is not visible to the user. Let's say you immediately switched from watching YouTube video to another application, WhatsApp or text app, anything. So that means the old activity is paused. Okay, and when you will come back to that, so on resume will be called. And then you have on stop, when the it is called when obviously it's no longer visible to the user, it's stopped, basically the activity is stopped. And on restart, when the activity is restarted by the user. And finally on destroy, on destroy, it is called before the activity is completely destroyed. Okay, so these are the most significant methods which you should remember, and if the interviewer asks you, then you should be able to explain each of these, maybe with example, like in what cases on pause, on resume will be called. If you can explain all these methods by taking any app example, like let's say you are using YouTube, so when you will open up YouTube, so on create, activity will be launched, then first method that will be called is on create method, right? So you can explain with example or maybe normally that these are the method in these sequences they will be called. Okay, so this diagram is very very important. If you want, you can take a screenshot of this as well. Let's erase this quickly and let's move ahead and look at the question number 2. So what are intents and how many types of total intents are there? So this is kind of at the heart of developing applications. Whenever you want to go from one activity to another activity, or you can say in layman's language, from one screen to screen 2. This is screen 1, this is screen 2. If you want to go from one first screen to second screen, then at the code level, at the logic level, programming level, Intents are used in the background. Intent is used to perform an action. It is mostly used to start activity, send broadcast, receiver, start services, and send messages between two activities. Okay, these are the most important functions of it. If you want me to write it down, so it is used to start activity, send broadcast, receiver, these two are, I mean, very fundamental, very important questions of Android app development. Send broadcast, receiver, or start services, and send messages between two activities. There are basically two types of intents. Let's see what are the two types. So intents, I hope you got a basic idea of it, what intents are. Intents are used heavily and mostly to navigate from one screen to another screen. Now that screen can be within the same application, or that screen can be of any other application as well. So this is activity 1 and this is activity 2. Intents are used for navigating. Pictorial representation usually helps in remembering things for longer period of time. That's why I prefer explaining things with help of diagrams and all those stuff. So number 1, explicit intent. Now what are explicit intent? As I said, there are two types of intents. Number 1, explicit intents. So let's say you developed an application, and on clicking one button you will go to second screen or second activity, right? Many examples are there. Let's say you are using any application, maybe like you are using WhatsApp, so there you will see profile picture and chat, recent chat, something like this, right? When you click on any of these, like let's say you click on this, so what will happen? A new page or new screen will open up, and the chat will show up here like this. Some new screen will open up, right? So within the same app you switch from one screen to another screen. This is explicit intent. Within the same application you are switching from one screen to another screen. Okay, this is the first type. This is the number 1 type, that is explicit intent. Number 2 is implicit intent. So in many cases, let's say you are playing music, okay? So whenever you want to open up the music file, then if you have multiple applications which can play music, like let's say Ghana, Play Music, or any other application, so it will ask you whether you want to play the music with this app or this app. So you are shifting to another application, so that is implicit intent. Okay, maybe you are using any application and you have to make payment. Pay button is there. On clicking this, you will be asked like multiple options. You can pay via Paytm, you can pay via Google Pay, or a lot many options are there, right? So they will ask you which do you want to perform action with this or this. This is implicit intent. Okay, like if you want to open a web browser, then either like Firefox or whatever web browser, Chrome is there in your phone, they will ask you all the options. For dialing, the phone app will open up. You are going to another application. So if you want to open up a screen which is not of your application, which will take you to another application, then that is implicit intent. Open map, Google Map will open up new application. For galleries, photo app will open up, gallery application will open up, again that is new application, right? So the camera, for camera as well, another application. Then moving ahead, question number 3 is describe different type of services in Android. So services are again very important concept, very much like intents are So service is an application component which can perform long running applications, or you can say long running operations. It can perform long running operations in the background. And it doesn't provide a user interface. Like, activity, it provides you a user interface, a UI. For user, whatever they see on the screen, for us that is activity, right? But services don't have any UI, don't provide UI. It's an application component basically which can perform long running operations in the background, and it doesn't provide any user interface. It can run in the background, okay, as I mentioned again, can run in background even when the user is not interacting with your application. Then as well it can run in the background. And there are three types of services basically. Number one, foreground service, background service, number two, and third is bound services. Okay, next, how can two distinct Android applications interact? Again, this is very significant question. If there are, let's say, two Android applications, then how can they interact with each other? So let me tell you, there are two ways of doing it. If you noticed my answer for previous question, then you would be knowing one of the answers already. So at the simplest level, there are two different ways for apps to interact on Android. Number one is via intents. Okay, so while explaining intents, I already explained that it is used for, it can also be used for passing data from one application to another. Passing data from one app to another. Okay, so number one way, the simplest one, is two apps can interact on Android via intents, and number two, through services. So we covered intents as well as services in previous questions, right? So to interact two application, they can do via intents or through services. So through services, where one application provides functionality for others to use. That is one way in which two Android applications can interact. Now let's move ahead. How would you communicate between two fragments? So let me explain. All the fragment to fragment communication is done either via shared view model or through the associated activity. So the very first method is view models or via interface, that is like through associated activity. Okay, well, the two fragments should never communicate directly, but the recommended way to communicate between fragment is to create a shared view model object, and both fragments can access the view model through their containing activity. The fragments can update data within the view model, and if the data is exposed using live data, the new state will be pushed to the other fragment as long as it is observing the live data from the view model. And another way is to define an interface in your fragment A. This is the method B. That is, you can define an interface in your fragment A and let your activity implement that interface. Now you can call the interface method in your fragment, and your activity will receive the event. Okay, now in your activity you can call your second fragment to update the text view with the received value. So basically there are two methods. Number one via view models and number two via interface. So you can like give the answer in short here if they ask you how two fragments can communicate. So number one is via shared view model and number two via intents. Okay, and like also share this that two fragments should ideally never communicate directly. Okay, so what are retained fragments? By default, the fragments are destroyed and recreated along with their parent activity. Whenever the activity is destroyed, so fragments are also destroyed and recreated with their parent activity when a configuration change occur. Configuration change means, when it's moved from horizontal to vertical, something like that. Calling set retain instance, there is a method if you have used it. So set retain instance, if you call it as true, it allows to bypass this and destroy and recreate cycles, signaling the system to retain the current instance of the fragment when the activity is recreated. So like by default the fragments will follow the same cycle as the activity. Okay, if the activity is destroyed, it will destroy. If the activity is recreated, it will recreate. But if you call the set reinstance method as true, it allows you to bypass this destroy and recreate cycle, and it will signal the system to retain the current instance of the fragment whenever the activity is recreated. Perfect. Now let's understand quickly what is Android data binding. So the data binding library is a support library, that allows you to bind UI components in your layout to data sources. It's very useful and handy. It is used to bind UI components in your layouts to the data sources in your application using a declarative format rather than programmatically. I mean, instead of using logical program, you can bind the UI component in your layout to data sources in your application. I will explain by writing a quick syntax as well. So layouts are often defined in activity with code that calls UI framework method. For example, let me write the code to explain it better to you. Let's change the color. So let's say there is a text view. Okay, text view, and usually we find the view by ID, right? Find view by ID and r.id dot, let's say txt is the ID. Okay, and then we will say text view dot set text view model dot maybe get username or something. Yeah, get username. So the following in this one, in the what we did is this code calls find view by ID. This code calls find view by ID to find a text view widget and bind it to the username property of the view model variable, right? So I mean, this is how and what Android data binding is. The pros of using Android data binding include it reduces boilerplate code. Number one, reduces the boilerplate code, and which in turns bring less coupling, and it also provides strong readability, enhances the readability of your code, and it also brings like powerful, easy to implement custom attribute and custom view, even faster than find view by ID, which we
often use in our code, right? The binding does a single pass on the view hierarchy, extracting the views with IDs. This mechanism can be faster than even calling view by ID, find view by ID for several views. Moving ahead, what is a job scheduler? Job scheduler API, it performs an operation for your application when a set of predefined conditions are met. Okay, it performs an operation when a set of predefined conditions are met, such as when a device is plugged into a power source or connected to a Wi-Fi network. It allows your application to perform given task while being considerate of the device battery at the cost of timing control. Unlike alarm manager class, if you have used the alarm manager class, the timing isn't exact compared to a custom sync adapter or the alarm manager. Job scheduler supports batch scheduling of jobs. The Android system can combine jobs so that battery consumption is reduced, and job manager makes handling upload easier as it handles automatically the unreliability of the network. It also survives application restarts. And moving ahead, what is the difference between compile SDK version and target SDK version? So the compile SDK version is the version of the app is for which it's compiled against. This means you can use Android API features included in that version of the API as well as all previous versions, obviously. Okay, so it is kind of compile SDK version. If you try and use API 16 features, but let's say compile SDK version is set to 15, you will get a compilation error, right? If you set compile SDK to 16, you can still run the application on API 15 devices as long as your app's execution path do not attempt to invoke any APIs specific to API 16. Okay, and talking about target SDK version, so it has nothing to do with how your app is compiled or what API you can utilize. The target SDK version is supposed to indicate that you have tested your application, that you have tested your app on presumably up to and including the version you specify. This is more like a certification or sign off you are giving the Android operating system as a hint to how it should handle your app in terms of OS features. Okay, perfect. Let's move ahead. So what is AIDL? So AIDL, it is, let me change the color. AIDL is short for Android Interface Definition Language. It is similar to other IDLs, that is other interface defined languages you might have worked with, and it allows you to define the programming interface that both the client and the service agree upon in order to communicate with each other using inter-process communication, that is also called as IPC. So these were the questions that we talked about in today's video.
I hope this detailed video was helpful for you. If yes, make sure you hit the like button and also subscribe to Talent500 YouTube channel. If you have any queries, any doubts, drop them in the comment section below and we will be happy to answer them.